it's called Under the Nostalgia Tree. If any of you read my work, you know that I'm profoundly anti-marriage, anti-capitalist, but I'm also anti-nostalgia. And nostalgia is something that you can't really escape if you happen to be a quote-unquote South Asian. So I wanted to address that tonight. Anyway, this began really, when Kareem and I were talking over coffee, this began as a rumination on mango trees. Specifically, the mango trees that I never knew while growing up, and I'll explain what I mean. Most of us, those of us especially who are familiar with some form of South Asian fiction or non-fiction, are familiar with a particular branch of South Asian writing, if you'll forgive the arboreal metaphor. That's laden, you know, it's the kind of writing that's laden with images of trees and their fruits and so on. Whether in the reveries of cookbook writers or the fiction of the latest award-winning, quote-unquote, South Asian novelist, it seems that the Indian subcontinent, in particular, is filled, is awash with people whose childhoods were spent under the shades of trees. Usually mango, sometimes neem, occasionally a formidable and preternaturally wise banyan, whose far-reaching roots become a tired metaphor for all kinds of ideas about, excuse me while I shift my bum around here, whose far-reaching roots become a tired metaphor for all kinds of ideas about community and earth and alliances and so on. I grew up for the most part in urban areas like Kathmandu, Bombay and Calcutta, and I've often wanted to say to my parents, you know, I really feel cheated about all of this. I mean, where are my trees? You know, where's my childhood spent under someone's, you know, my grandparents' trees and so on? And, you know, I mentioned Kathmandu, which I'll be talking about in a little while, but I like to mention that every opportunity I get. That's probably the most sort of semi-ruralish, not quite urban area I've ever lived in. That's one reason. The other reason is that it makes me feel profoundly cool sometimes. At least I like to think so, because in a world, you know, I feel very lost these days, because I left India a long time ago. Well, not a long time ago, but the last time I went there was in 1994. So even my understanding of quote-unquote Bollywood, we used to call it Hindi films at the time, but even my understanding of Bollywood is, you know, nothing compared to what goes on today. In a world where, so I look for cool, in a world where everyone exudes Bollywood cool, where my American friends know more about Indian celebrities than I do, and my Australian Facebook friends post videos of super cool hybrid Bhangra genres that I never even knew existed, I begin to grasp at straws. Now, you can probably tell from my over-explaining that I have tenuous connections to South Asia, or at least what I used to refer to as, you know, the countries India, Pakistan, Burma. Even the term South Asian causes some resentment. I mean, I used to be Indian, right, before I came here. And South Asia somehow feels like I've given in to the US's constant taxonomizing, the result of some covert CIA plot to rid me of any illusions that I once had an entire country of origin and not just a directional point on a continent. So as you can tell, some of the sarcasm is kind of a nervous reaction. I'm terrified of seeming uncool and unsophisticated, you know, in this incredibly hip Bollywood-era world. But it's also, frankly, a gut reaction against what I see as a kind of glossy and often dangerous form of nostalgia that's wrapped in a 21st century glossy veneer of Bollywood's suffused globality. And I want to talk a little bit about that. As I said, I haven't been back to India since 1994 for all kinds of reasons that I haven't really begun writing about. I probably will at some point. I don't follow its news too much, and when I hear of the neoliberal transformation of the country into a set of sprawling malls and uber-hip nightclubs, I'm constantly reminded that my own past is something of a foreign country. In the new Indian century, where the vast majority of nearly 1 billion people live in abject poverty, and the daily humiliation accorded to outsourced earthling personnel is seen as progress, I'm left with a hesitant form of not nostalgia. I live now in Uptown as a rootless citizen, and I revel in my anonymity. I'm often read as Latina, or as Arab, or as Black, depending on who's doing the looking, and what they have at stake in discerning my identity. And my general policy is just to simply adopt whatever identity they just decide to bestow upon me. When I open my mouth to speak, my accent excites people, in much the same way that I imagine early 19th century naturalists were once excited by the earliest sightings of the marsupial. They look at me and they go, you know, it doesn't quite fit, it's sort of weird. The hair, the skin color, the voice, not quite there. Anyway, so that's sort of my experience, you know, my sort of tenuous connection that I feel to the South Asian connection that I feel a lot of other people seem to have more of, right? And I find myself, however, every now and then butting against this quote-unquote South Asian identity, especially living in Chicago, which has a lot of immigrants from the subcontinent and also in the surrounding suburbs. And I find myself often, for instance, irritated and turning into the kind of person I thought I would never grow into. I find myself irritated at my local library when they host a dance presentation by some young Indians lifted straight from Bollywood in honor of Diwali, which they then proceed to describe as the Indian New Year, which is profoundly annoying, even though I'm not Muslim or God-fearing, because it's not, it's as if somehow Indian Muslims no longer count. I'm terrified of all the accounts I read about and know about of what someone has termed the Yankee Hindutva, which is the rise of a Hindu nationalism within the United States. And I find that terrifying, especially since it's happening among very young people. And then, of course, Bollywood in India keeps butting into my face every now and then in different ways. Obama hosts his first state dinner for Manmohan Singh, and the entire event is hijacked by a lehenga-clad white woman and her sort of kind of looking Indian, kind of maybe, not really, we don't really know where he's from, husband. Both of whom prance into the White House without so much as a by your leave. Into all of this, of course, comes also the globalization of my quote-unquote South Asian queer identity, which brings me back to Kathmandu.